Hello, everybody. How are you today? Good? Not so good? Sad? Happy? Hungry? I'm hungry. I'm always hungry. Well, however you are, I hope that for the next hour or so you will join me and find out what happens next in the Devil's Engine Hellfighters. And that whatever happens next in the Devil's Engine Hellfighters, it will take your mind off life and make you feel, at least for an hour, like things are cool. We are kind of in the middle of it all at the moment, inside the engine, deep beneath the streets of Paris. Pan has just stumbled across Mammon. Mammon is down there with his engineers, and they think he's trying to reunite the engines to kind of open the gates of hell. And Mammon has basically said to Pan, actually, you know, we're not trying to destroy the world. We've been trying to save it from you, and which is a bit of a twist. And Marlowe is also down there, and he's trying to find Charlie. Charlie is somewhere inside the machine. So this is where we join them. I'll try and get through another 3 chapters now, 3 or 4 chapters for an hour or so. And this chapter is called Reunited. So I guess he finds Charlie. Okay. Marlowe had absolutely no idea what he was doing. Pan was running across the platform, crossbow in her hands, her body glowing with the force of the energy inside her. She could take care of herself. He cut to the side, the engine a maelstrom of movement ahead of him, a mechanical hurricane. The last time he'd been here, it had been nothing like this, just an insect whisper from somewhere out there. But the last time he'd been here, it had simply been forging his contract. Now it was preparing to open a door between worlds. He reached the edge of the platform and skidded to a halt. Beneath him, the engine whirred in a frenzy, needles and pins and cogs and springs churning. It was like standing on a cliff in a storm, and he had to close his eyes against a rush of vertigo. How the hell was he supposed to find Charlie? He opened his eyes, scanned the ocean-big mass of moving parts. The last explosion was still rising like a comet's tail, something burning out there. He jumped, landing hard at the foot of the engine. From down here, it was more like a forest, the parts so much bigger than they looked from above. The speed they moved at was terrifying, like he was standing in front of a combine harvester, blades of dark metal about to slice him apart. The noise was like nothing he had ever experienced. So loud that he could feel it in every cell. It was almost as if it was calling to him, and when he took a step forward, the section right in front of him stopped dead, a path opening up in the madness. It wanted him to enter. He hesitated, then put a hand to his hips, feeling the heat of Pan's kiss there. He wasn't sure what she'd done to him, but some of his terror had evaporated. He was still afraid, but she had given him strength. She had promised him, too. She'd made a contract of her own. Get through this, and there'll be another kiss. And that had to be worth risking death for, right? He stepped between 2 vast black trunks, each twice as tall as him and forged from a dull black metal. They bristled with spikes that looked like drill bits and were ringed by vast iron cogs. Branches split out from them, each of which had to contain thousands of moving parts, each smaller than the one it was connected to, until they were so minuscule he couldn't even see them. They looked sharp enough to cut through flesh and bone, and they had to be, he guessed, because each of those pieces had the ability to open a hole in reality and change whatever lay beneath. But they stayed still as he passed, the machine grinding to a halt, showing him which way to go. He plunged into the darkness, into the noise. Every time he passed a section of the engine, it began to move again behind him, the air thrumming with the force of it. Not far ahead, there was another explosion, one that filled the engine with fire and made it groan like a living thing, like some huge leviathan. What the hell was happening up there? Was that the sound of somebody breaking the seals of the universe, opening the gate to hell? A section of the engine spun to a halt and he pushed through it. On the other side was something resembling a forest that had been cleared and burned, an area the size of an aeroplane hangar, where there were no cogs, no gears, just pieces of broken metal embedded in the ground, everything drenched in fire. The scorched earth ahead was glowing red hot, puddles of molten iron turning the air into a shimmering haze. There was so much smoke that even though his contract was still in place, his asthma cured, he was struggling to breathe. So much smoke that he could barely see 20 feet in front of him. But 20 feet was enough. There was a shape there, a figure standing in the horror and the heat. Not so much standing in it, as made from it. "Charlie?" Marlowe called out, choking on the word. He took a step into the ruin, but had to stop because the heat was just too much. The shimmering silhouette ahead was walking away, disappearing into the haze. He opened his mouth and called his name again, louder. "Charlie!" This time the figure stopped and turned. He stood in the inferno like he was sculpted from flame, his body a core of darkness wearing a corona of blazing yellow. He took another step, the bones of the engine crunching beneath his feet. Closer now, and Marlowe could see that where Charlie's eyes should have been, there were just portals of light. It was like staring into the depths of hell itself. He felt that if he looked at them for too long, he would simply end, that the sheer power there would scrub him from existence. It's not Charlie, he realised. It's a demon, or worse. The figure kept coming, faster now. It lifted a burning hand and pointed it at Marlowe, the air actually crackling and spitting with the heat of his touch. Oh no. Marlowe turned to run, but the wall of parts behind him was spinning again, a gyroscope of blades that caged him in. Death in a furnace, or death in a blender? What the hell kind of choice was that? He whirled back, fists clenched. Even with the power of the engine inside him, he didn't stand a chance against whatever this was. It would turn him into ash with just a thought. It took another couple of steps towards him, the roar of it even louder than the sound of the engine, the heat of it making the air on Marlowe's head curl and shrivel, even though it was 15 feet away. No chance. But what else could he do? He ran. But the heat was too much. It was like moving into a burning building, his skin blistering. He slowed, squinting through his fingers, knowing that any second now he was going to erupt. Then the demon blinked, and the flames sputtered out, like he'd been doused with water. It took a moment for the splotches of light to leave Marlowe's vision, but when he could see again, he wasn't sure whether to start laughing or crying. In the end, he did both. Charlie stood there, his best friend, his only friend. He looked just the way he had last time Marlowe had seen him, the same messy brown hair, the same wide eyes. Only this time, he was stark naked. His skin rippled with delicate petals of flame, his bare feet standing in a puddle of molten rock. The air around him still danced, making him look more like an illusion than ever. He studied Marlowe like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then his mouth lifted into a smile. "Charlie!" Marlowe yelled again, and he almost started running again, ready to wrap his arms around him, until he remembered where they were. "What the hell, dude?" he said over the sound of the engine. "What's going on? What happened to you?" "Same thing that happened to you," said Charlie, his voice the same as Marlowe remembered, the same voice he'd listened to and shared stories with and laughed alongside for years. "The engine." "I don't get it, man," said Marlowe, coughing smoke from his lungs. "I don't get why you'd side with Maman. What did he offer you, money? Whatever it was, Charlie, it wasn't worth it. It isn't worth this." "Marlowe, you got it all wrong," said Charlie. "Oh, it's because I left you, right?" Marlowe shouted. "Back on Staten Island. I'm sorry, man. I never should have done that. I just didn't want to see you get hurt. I'm sorry." Charlie shook his head. "If you hadn't left me there, then Maman never would have found me. I never would have discovered the truth," he said. "You can't trust a thing he tells you," Marlowe said. A section of the engine behind Charlie gave way, metal screeching as it crashed into the glowing rock. Marlowe flinched. "He's a liar. He just wants to open the gates. You've seen what happens. You've..." "Says who, Marlowe?" Charlie asked, taking a step forward. "Says Ostheim?" "Yeah," said Marlowe. "He's been trying to stop Maman for years, for like decades. It can't happen, Charlie. Our families, all these people, they'll die." Charlie actually laughed. "Maman was right," he said, taking another step towards Marlowe. "He was totally right. You have no idea." "What are you talking about?" Marlowe said. "No idea about what?" "That you're fighting on the wrong side," he said. "You've been fighting with the bad guys." That's a lie," Marlowe said. The sweat was stinging his eyes and he wiped it away. The heat was unbearable, the inside of his mouth made of kindling. He felt like with one stray spark, He'd erupt into flames. Pam, Herc, they're good people, Charlie. They're trying to do the right thing. Maybe, Charlie shouted back, but they're good people following the orders of a bad man. Ostheim, he's been trying to bring the engines together. He's been trying for years. He's the one who wants to end the world. No, said Marlowe. No, that's not right. You expect me to believe that when you're right here, opening the gates yourself? Take a look, dude, Charlie said, lifting his arms. Just take a look. This seemed to you like an opening anything? Marlowe looked past him, seeing the wasteland there. You're not opening the gates to hell? Marlowe, said Charlie, one eyebrow raised. I know I ain't exactly a saint, but did you ever hear me say, boy, you know what I feel like doing today? Setting free a bunch of demons and maybe the devil and watching them rip the world apart. Then what the hell are you doing? Marlowe asked. Destroying it, Charlie yelled back, and the engine seemed to roar in outrage. Charlie put his hands to his ears, practically screaming the words. This was the only way. You have to bring the engines together in order to use them, but you have to bring them together in order to take them apart too. Another section gave up the ghost, crumbling in the heat. Charlie took a few more steps forward until he was almost close enough to touch. Heat was still radiating from him, like Marlowe was standing next to an oven with the door open. Maman found me right after you left, Charlie said. Took me in, waited for me to sober up. I thought I was dead, man. I thought you'd poisoned me or something, that I was hallucinating him. I thought he was a monster. I've seen him, Charlie. He is a monster. No, he's not. I mean, he's messed up. All those years using the engine. He's a ruin. I don't even think he's human anymore. Gives you the creeps, no doubt. Truth is, though, he's just a kid. At least he was back when all this began. He told me what was happening, told me about Ostheim, about what he wanted to do with the engines, told me Ostheim is a lying bastard, that he's brainwashed you and that girl and the old guy and everyone else who works for him. Made you think you were fighting for the right side. Charlie paused, running a hand through his hair. Marlowe chewed his knuckles so hard that it hurt. It didn't make any sense. He'd met Ostheim just that morning. He was harmless. I hate to say it, Marlowe, said Charlie, like he was reading his mind, but he's about as evil as it gets. He's old, older than he looks. He's been doing this for years, centuries. So has Maman. They've been at each other like stray dogs for half of time. You've got it wrong, Charlie, said Marlowe, but the words sounded hollow. Not this time, man. Maman told me. He showed me. All the stuff Ostheim has done, all the people he's killed. He told me he needed my help. He told me you needed my help. If I didn't say yes, then Ostheim would use you the way he uses everyone. He'd use you to open the gates. The world was reeling, and Marlowe had to screw his eyes shut for a moment. When he opened them again, Charlie was even closer. He looked at his friend, saw the scar on his stomach. He tried to kill you, said Marlowe. He got that girl to shoot you, got Patrick to throw you off a mountain. How is that being on the right side? It was part of the plan, Charlie said. Wasn't exactly supposed to go that way, though. Patrick was broken. He was crazy after what happened to his sister. You were supposed to get me back, smuggle me into the engine. So you could open the red door from inside, Marlowe said. Charlie nodded. Maman told me that as soon as I got to the nest, I had to try and get inside the engine. It was the only way. Get inside the engine and make a deal. To be the Human Torch, Marlowe asked. To have the power to destroy the engine, he said. No way. There's no way the engine would let you trade for that. It's just a machine, Charlie said. The engine does what it's told. Just a machine. I got my powers and I opened the red door. Marlowe jabbed a finger at him, a fire of his own burning up from inside. Yeah, and you killed them, he said. You killed all of them. Bully and Hope and Seth. Christ, Charlie, he was just an old man. I didn't do it, Charlie said, holding up his hands. Maman did. He couldn't take any chances. He'd been waiting decades, longer, for a way inside the engine. He couldn't afford to mess up. You don't get it, do you? You don't get what's at stake here. It's everything, Marlowe. The whole world. What's a handful of lives compared to 1,000,000? 1,000,000,000? It was what Pan had always said. And Marlowe thought of her now, fighting Maman. Was he telling her the same thing? Would she listen? It was Pan. Of course she wouldn't. Something was niggling at the back of his mind. Something bad. But everything was moving too fast for him to grasp it. But if you're destroying the engine, I mean, why now? Why didn't you just destroy your own engine? Make it impossible for them to be joined? It doesn't work like that, said Charlie. The engines can't be destroyed unless they're joined. Look, it's complicated, and there really isn't the time. I have to do this, Marlowe. I have to do this now, while both engines are here. The palms of his hands suddenly erupted, twin blowtorches that burned phosphorus bright. Wait, Marlowe yelled, staggering away from the heat, from the light, from the awful, unexpected truth. Just wait, please, Charlie, I don't get it. I don't get any of it. Where's the other engine? There's only one, Charlie said. There has only ever been one, but it's split into two, each one frozen into its own pocket of time. What? It's the perfect defence, linked but separate, the same but different. If you try to destroy one version, it repairs itself from the other. It self-replicates its broken pieces. What? And now they'd been joined. You must have seen it, the way nothing seems right, nothing seems solid. It's because both engines, both of those bubbles of time are here, right now, in the present. Destroy the engine now, and it has no means of repairing itself. The engine roared again, all around them, the sound of the world splitting in two. Charlie looked at it, his face warped with contempt. Destroy the bastard now, and it can never heal. But if you destroy it, Marlowe said. Charlie threw him a sad smile. Yeah, there's no way of ending my contract, he said. There's no way back. For you. Or me. Great, thought Marlowe. But hey, what's one life? Charlie said with a shrug. And everyone else is saved. Got to be worth it, yeah? There it was again, that thought nestling at the back of Marlowe's skull. Something important, something wrong. He closed his eyes, peering into the storm. Maman, he planned all this, right? He said, looking at Charlie again. The flames were creeping over his body. His eyes were actually glowing, and when he nodded, he left sparkler trails in Marlowe's vision. He'd been planning it for years, he said, to get somebody inside. But it doesn't make sense, said Marlowe. Ostheim had the engine locked up tight. He'd never risk letting in anyone who could open the doors. He must have thought he could trust me, said Charlie, because I was with you. He never even knew me, said Marlowe. I'd already put the engine at risk once running off. Why would he trust you any more than me? Something exploded. A deep, bone-rattling roar that almost knocked Marlowe off his feet. It hadn't come from the engine, he was pretty sure about that. It had come from somewhere overhead. Dust and debris rained down, and he spat out the taste of it. That niggling thought was closer now, fluttering just out of sight, like a moth against the night. No way, he said, as much to himself as Charlie. No way he'd just let you in like that, not unless... And there it was, suddenly right in the front of his head. Oh, Jesus, Charlie, he knew. What? Who? Ostheim. He knew who you were. He knew which side you were on. He knew what you were going to do. That doesn't make any sense, said Charlie, the light in his eyes guttering out again. He blinked, frowning. Why would he let me in? Because it was the only way, said Marlowe. He's been trying to find Mamon's engine for decades, right? To unite them. But all he needed to do was give up his own engine, to hand it right over. He knew that when they were together, they'd kick out a signal, make it easier to find them. No, said Charlie, shaking his head. We did it for him, said Marlowe. We brought them together. We brought them here. We left the door right open for him. We have to... Another sound from above, like the skies were falling. This time a stalactite detached from the ceiling, one that had to be bigger than a house. It fell lazily, the ground shaking as it landed somewhere out there. The engine was moving faster now, every piece a blur, like it knew something was about to happen. And it was right. Marlowe turned the way he'd come, everything lost behind a wall of mechanical chaos. But he didn't need to see to know that something bad was coming. He could feel it inside every cell. Ostheim, said Charlie behind him, and despite the power that flowed through him, his voice trembled. He's here. Uh-oh, Spaghetti-O! The next chapter, rather appropriately, is called War. The black pool engulfed her, gulped her down. She tumbled into it, no chance to prepare for the panic, for the horror. Phantom hands groped for her, hauling her deeper, deeper. The darkness was absolute, and when she could hold her breath no more and she finally opened her mouth, it flooded inside like cold poison. But she'd been here before, so many times. She pushed the panic away, studying that darkness until it began to part. Clouds, then sweeping, awful figures, half drowned in the shadows. And there, a mountain of flesh and bone that sat a million miles away, and yet somehow right next to her, which studied her with the festering rot holes in its face.
"What is it that you desire?"
it asked. Not a sound, but a feeling that pulsed through the dark water. She shivered with the force of it. Not disgust, not fear. Excitement. This place, right here in the heart of the engine, is where she belonged. "I want the truth!" She fired the words upwards towards the thing that sat there. "I want to know who is trying to bring the engines together and who is trying to destroy them." The easiest request in the world. Why had she never asked for it before? "I want the truth," she said again, and again, and again, a mantra hurled out into the engine.
"That is all?"
it asked. And suddenly night was standing right beside her, utterly real. She reached out to Pan, her face wet with tears. "Please," she said, "just bring me back. It is so hot down here. It is so lonely. Please, Pan, you can bring me back." "No," Pan said. "It wasn't night. I'm sorry. I want the truth, that's all, the truth."
"It is done,"
said the creature inside the engine, with another pulse of sound that could only be laughter.
"And the price is your soul."
Then Pan was rising out of that uterine quiet, up into the heat and the noise of the world. She burst from the pool, clawing in a long, desperate breath. She kicked at the water, reaching for the rim and not quite finding it. She plunged under, those hands grabbing her again, trying to haul her below. Then a hand on her wrist, pulling her up. She let it, flopping out of the water and over the lip of the pool onto the beautiful, solid ground. Mammon was there, his face a boy's face and yet also 100 different faces, like his flesh couldn't hold him. He held on to her for a moment more, and in his touch she saw his story in a heartbeat. A child who lived inside the engine, whose brothers and sisters played amongst the moving parts. A child who was betrayed by one of his own and who now wanted to destroy the engines, always to destroy them. Then he let go, holding his fingers like he'd been burned. You know, he said. "Oh, God," she groaned. She coughed black water from her lungs, the droplets squirming across the stone as they tried to make their way back to the pool. "Oh, God, you were telling the truth." The awful, unbelievable, soul-ending truth that her life was a lie. She would have cried if she could remember how. The world trembled again with the force of another explosion. She sat up, grimacing. What's done was done. She had to think straight. "That's Charlie out there, right?" she said, using the lip of the pool to get herself to her feet. "What's he doing?" Mammon wasn't looking at the engine, though. He was looking up, and he was looking scared. "Too soon," he said, shaking his head. "Too soon." Noises were rippling through the open vault door, distant screams. There was another dull crunch overhead, like a giant was jumping on the floor up there. Rocks pattered down around her, some bouncing off the liquid surface of the pool and clattering to the stone. A section of the wall high above them bulged and cracked. It's the elevator shaft, she thought. Something was on its way down. Something big. Mammon turned to her, his eyes full of tears. He had opened his mouth to speak when a section of the engine close to the platform burst into flames, so bright that Pan had to screw her eyes shut. When she looked again, a mushroom cloud of smoke was billowing up, the mechanism beneath reduced to a collection of molten parts. Somebody was walking through the chaos, somebody crafted from fire. Around him the engine whirred and roared, almost in a panic. She swore she could see parts of it withdrawing from the heat, like a snail's eyes, pulling into itself. "Pan," said Mammon, The wall above the vault door split further, a booming howl rising even above the noise of the engine and the roar of the fire. Mammon glanced over his shoulder. "I thought we had more time," he said. Then he turned back. "You have to get out of here. You have to survive." "But I won't be able to hold him back, Pan," Mammon said. "You need to go. I'll distract him as best I can. But when you're clear..." Another pillar of flames to the side, and more dull explosions from behind the wall. Pan felt like she was caught between a forest fire and a minefield. The concussive waves coming from both sides were enough to pulverise her. Mammon took her head in his hand, gently, and drew her back to him. He looked even younger than before, just a boy. How had she gotten it so wrong? "I got it wrong too," he said, plucking the thought from her head. "I didn't see what he was doing. I thought I'd outmastered him, outmanoeuvred him. It was all part of his plan." But he's just a man," said Pan, picturing Ostine with his old clothes and his comb-over. "It's a clever man who plays the fool," said Mammon. "A strong man who plays the coward, and only the very worst of us can pass as human." "Wait, what?" said Pan. A wave of blast furnace heat rolled over her, another section of the engine melting away into molten puddles. The figure on fire strode from it, followed by another. She could barely make out the second guy in the blazing light, but then he darted forwards, clambering up the side of the platform. "Marlowe," she said, and it took everything she had not to run to him, if only because he was somebody familiar, an anchor to stop her flipping upside down with the rest of the world. He stood there, staring at her, then at Mammon. For a second she thought he was going to charge at him, and she had her mouth open to tell him to wait. When he spoke, "I know," said Marlowe. "Charlie told me." He turned, ducking onto one knee and offering his hand. Then Charlie was there, no longer on fire. He scooted onto the platform and Marlowe pulled his hand free, yelping, "Dude, you're really hot!" He was also completely naked. Something crunched from behind the vault door, a cloud of dust erupting through it. "He is here," said Mammon. "Pan, do as I say. Get out. Ostine will open the gates, but it doesn't mean the end. There is another way." "Another way," said Charlie, as he and Marlowe joined them by the pool. "Find Meridiana," Mammon said. "She's the only one who can defeat Ostine, the only one who can end this." "Meridiana," said Marlowe. "The evil one?" "Not evil," said Mammon. "Her mind has gone, but she's not evil. She was never evil. Find her." "Where is she?" said Pam. "Hiding," said Mammon. "She's been in hiding for years. Look for her in the spaces between. It's all I know. Look for her in yourselves. She's hiding in time, somewhere clever, somewhere he could never find her." "So how were we supposed to?" said Marlowe. "Because..." The vault door spun off its hinges, flying out into the engine like a cannonball. Something was moving in the darkness beyond. Mammon glanced up at it like a child waiting for a punch to land. "Because she will feel the change," he said. "She will know that Ostine has the engines. She'll want you to find her." "And if she doesn't?" said Pam. Her heart was trying to crack her ribs on its way out, her whole body shaking. "Then we are all worse than dead," said Mammon. "Go to Venice, to Castello. It's an old town. All I know is that the last we saw of her she had a shop, a mirror shop. You'll find her there, somewhere, if she wants you to. It's our only hope, it's..." No. Ostine walked through the vault door and stood at the top of the steps. He looked exactly the same as he had that morning, drowning in baggy clothes, his lank hair falling over his face. Only his expression had changed. His eyes were bulging, his mouth twisted open into a rictus smile, one that seemed too big for his face. He looked out into the engine, and that same smile split even further, a deep, unpleasant laugh spilling out. "Go," said Mammon, "and do not look back." Ostine heard him, his head twisting to look down the stairs. The smile fell away, replaced with a look of fury that was as far from human as anything Pan had ever seen. Something throbbed out of him, a pulse of evil that made her want to reach inside and pull out her soul, to trample it to dust. "Go!" Mammon yelled. No. Her anger was demonic. It was forged from fire, from all those years of blind loyalty. How many people had she killed for him? How many lives had she ruined for him? How many people were being torn to pieces in hell, all because of what she'd done for him? She was going to murder him. She was going to end him. She took a step forward, and so did Ostine. And he changed. His head flipped open, like his jaw was hinged, his mouth a gaping black hole. Something pushed its way out of it, something oil black and too big. It might have been a lamprey eel, its tip ringed with teeth, its body slick and black. It kept coming, exploding up from Ostheim's moor, 10 yards long, 20, 30, too long and too fat to have ever fit inside a human body. Oh, God. It split in two, peeling from itself like a cheese string. Then again and again, stretching into long, wet fingers. They all punched earthwards, sliding down the steps so fast they were just a blur. Some cut to the side, feeling their way into the engine. The rest came right for them. Pan ducked, feeling one of the huge black limbs thunder over her head. Another followed, the air growing dark and cold as their bulk blocked the firelight. They thumped into Maman like charging bulls, 2, 3, 6, 10 of them now, one after the other, pounding him into the stone. "Pan, we gotta go," Marlowe yelled, cutting between them, making for the stairs. Charlie was screaming Mamon's name, his body erupting into flames again. He stretched out his arms and released a plume of fire that cut across the platform, engulfing the squirming mass of shapes that hid Maman. Above them, Ostheim roared. His body was torn in a dozen places, dark, clotted blood splattering the stairs. Pieces of his flesh were dropping away like old clothes as more shapes forced their way from him, tapeworm thin. They whip-cracked through the air in a frenzy, one punching through the stone floor inches from Pan, showering her in shrapnel.
"It is mine!"
The voice was everywhere and nowhere, echoing around her skull like a cathedral bell had been rung in there. She felt a hand on her arm, Marlowe dragging her across the platform. Some of the limbs had embedded themselves in the floor, stuck there like ivy as they grew over the edge of the platform. The engine seemed to be welcoming them, grinding to a halt to let them in.
"It is mine!"
No! The nest of snakes next to the pool blew like it was packed with explosives, showering the platform with rancid pieces of black flesh. Maman rose from the carnage, his body shifting and glitching like it was trying to pull itself out of the universe. He opened his hands and a wave of black light burst from him, so impossibly dark that it seemed the world there had been erased. Ostheim screamed again, although he no longer had a mouth to scream from. The last of his body split away, shedding muscle and bone. Beneath was a mess of sinew, shot through with what looked like copper and bronze, an insane union of organic and mechanical parts. It moved fast, scuttling onto the wall like a spider. Its countless limbs whirled through the air, a hurricane of impossible flesh. Then they darted down towards Maman again, scorpion tails trying to punch their way through him. Maman vanished into thin air, appearing again almost immediately on the other side of the pool. He scooped a hand through the air and hurled another missile of nothing, an antimatter bomb that burned into the wall where Ostheim had been. The creature was already on the move, the stone splitting and dissolving where it was struck. More rocks fell from overhead, some as big as cars. "Pan, come on!" Marlowe was screaming at her. She tore her eyes away from Maman, focused on getting across the platform. They were at the stairs now, Marlowe stumbling up them, Charlie behind her and pushing her forward on a wave of heat. A crunch from the platform and Pan couldn't not look. It was like her head was on a string, somebody else tugging at it. Ostheim propelled himself from the wall, his immense insect bulk landing on Maman. Those limbs rose up as one, then stabbed down, so hard that the platform groaned, cracking away from the wall. One side tipped, water sloshing out from the pool and hissing as it poured into the fires that raged there. Maman fought back, waves of negative light pouring off him, each one ripping away some of Ostheim's skin, gouging out chunks of flesh, sending limbs flying. But for everything that Maman cut away, something else grew. Things were pouring out of Ostheim now, liquid quick but as solid as obsidian. The limbs pounded the rock with industrial speed, so fast that Pan couldn't bear to look at them. The noise was like 1,000 pneumatic drills at once, a cloud of smoke pouring from them, smoke and blood misting into the ruptured air. "No!" Charlie raged, burning so fiercely that the stairs were melting around him. He fired out another jet of molten heat right into Ostheim's back, but he didn't even seem to feel it. The noise of it, of Ostheim's attack, of the howling engine, was too much. Pan felt deaf from it. And yet something still rose from the madness, a voice whisper-weak and haunting. "Go, Pan, and find her. You do not have long." "Come on," yelled Marlowe from the top of the stairs. Pan turned, tripped, sprawling. She climbed the rest on all fours because she couldn't trust her legs to hold her. Marlowe grabbed her, helping her up. He ducked through the door, but she couldn't bring herself to follow. Not yet. She looked down, the view from here like the boxes in a theatre, everything perfectly clear. Ostheim was a hulking mass, the body of a vast spider, but at least 30 limbs snaking from him. Only a couple were still pounding at the ground, because there was nothing left to pound. Mammon was a scattered mess of parts, a butcher's waste bag scattered over the ruined platform. Pan could make out half a skull, a flap of face still attached, one eye roving madly. It seemed to see her, or maybe she just imagined it. "Find her!" Then a pincer-like limb skewered it, and the skull shattered like glass. Ostheim lumbered off the remains of Mammon, each of his limbs darting over the edge of the platform and plunging into the smoking mess of the engine. "No!" Charlie yelled, a voice made of heat and fire. He loosed another strike, one that melted rock, that made the air burn bright. Ostheim's head, just a tumorous lump on the bulk of his body, the vague shape of a face there, twisted up, the flames washing over it like they were nothing but water. He dismissed Charlie with a snort, then crawled over the edge of the platform, the engine opening up and welcoming him like a mother bear welcomes a cub. Charlie looked up at Pan, and even though he was an inferno, she could see the emotion there, the grief pouring off him. "There's nothing we can do," she said. "Come on." For a moment he burned even more fiercely, the metal staircase squealing in the heat. Then the flames snapped off, and he ran up the last few steps, the heat ebbing from him. Together they took one last look at the platform, at the remains of Mammon, at the shape that scuttled into the engine, that stretched out its limbs into the smoking chaos and began to mend it. Then Marlowe called to them, and Pan turned away, Mammon's voice still echoing inside her head. "Find her." Mammon! I never thought I would feel sad for him. Okay, we'll read one more chapter because that'll take us to the end of this section of the book. Okay, this chapter is called "Let's Get the Hell Out of Here." I think that's a good idea. They crossed the room in a heartbeat, piling into the elevator. Marlowe jabbed a hand on the button, waiting for one of those limbs to snake through the door or to wrap itself round his throat. He pressed the button again and again. "Oh, come on, you piece of garbage!" The doors rumbled shut and the elevator started to rise, whining in protest. Marlowe slid down the elevator wall. It was too much. Something was rising inside him, something huge, surely too big, too powerful. It felt like a tsunami, and even with all the power of the world inside him, he couldn't hold it back. He curled his legs up, pushed his face into his knees so that nobody would see the tears, but there was nothing he could do to hide the sobs that racked him, making his whole body shake. It was too much. It was too much. He felt somebody sit down next to him. Somebody else sat on the other side, kicking off so much heat he might have been leaning against a radiator. Hands wrapped themselves around him from both sides, tight. No words. They just held him until the ocean calmed. Of all the things Charlie and Pan had done for him, Marlowe thought, this was the one that truly saved his life. He scrubbed the tears away on his pants, blinked up at Pan. She was crying too, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and confusion. Sniffing, she gave him one last squeeze and let go. Marlowe felt weirdly naked without the weight of her arms on his shoulders, like she'd taken a piece of him with her. Charlie was naked, and when he leaned in for another hug, Marlowe pushed him away. "Dude, not until you've got pants on." And the thought of it, of sitting next to his naked best friend in the elevator from hell, made something else rush up in his throat, a bark of lunatic laughter that exploded wetly from his nose. "Gross!" said Pan, getting unsteadily to her feet. Her mouth was a thin, grey line. Marlowe didn't want to know what she was going through right now, the horror of finding out she was one of the bad guys. He turned back to Charlie. "Why were you prancing around in the Altogether, though?" Charlie sniffed, his tears evaporating from his skin. He looked down at himself, as if truly noticing for the first time. "Oh, I was wearing clothes," he said. They must have burned off." "Any excuse," said Marlowe, as Charlie got to his feet, everything hanging out. "You've got no shame?" Charlie shrugged his skinny shoulders, his grin lighting up the elevator. "Hey, it's what God gave me." "He didn't give you much," said Pan. "Hey!" Charlie said, finally slapping a hand to his crotch. His cheeks were glowing so much, Marlowe thought he was about to burst into flames again. The elevator rattled upwards ridiculously slowly, grinding against the walls. How could it be taking so long? "You think Ostheim's coming after us?" Marlowe asked. Pan shook her head. "You saw him. All he cares about is the engine." "Christ, how could I have been so stupid?" "It wasn't your fault," said Charlie. "He's been doing this for so long. He's fooled so many people." She shot him a look that could have blasted him out the side of the elevator shaft. She swallowed, the fury leaving her face, leaving her with nothing. She put her head against the wall, her fists clenching and unclenching over and over. "I was so sure. I've never even thought to question him." "I don't get it," Marlowe said. "We saw him like a few hours ago. He was just this old dude. He had a comb over, for Christ's sake." "You must have felt him, though," said Charlie. "Mammon always said that something as evil as Ostheim can be hidden from the eye, but never from the soul." Marlowe thought back to that morning. It felt like Marlowe thought back to that morning. It felt like a million years ago. When they'd arrived at the church in Prague, he'd felt like his insides were being minced. But that had been the red door, hadn't it? "He used it to mask himself," said Pan, slapping herself on the forehead. "That's why he arranged to meet us there, so the stench of the door would hide him. Damn it, the door wasn't even there anymore. Why didn't I think?" The elevator rattled so hard that Marlowe thought it was going to come loose and drop them all to their deaths. Then the gears whined and it shuddered to a halt. Pan wrenched open the gates. Through them was the bullpen, drenched in darkness and silence. Marlowe had been so caught up in the fight downstairs that he'd completely forgotten about the others. He shared a look with Pan, then watched her stick her head through the opening. "Herc," she said quietly, "are you out?" A gunshot ricocheting off the outside of the elevator. Pan staggered back in, a spark tearing itself from her fingers and zigzagging from ceiling to floor. Past the crack of thunder, Marlowe could hear somebody shouting inside the bullpen. Sorry, my bad," Herc yelled. And his ugly face was there, peering inside. He offered them something that was probably a smile. "Wasn't expecting to see you all alive," he said. "Thought it was him. I thought it was Ostheim." Marlowe saw his face crumple under the weight of the truth. "Then it's a good job you're an awful shot," said Pan, barging past him. Marlowe pushed himself up the wall and followed her. It was so dark in the bullpen that he could barely see, the light from the elevator a copper penny in an ocean of ink. It wasn't a bad thing, though. The air was heavy with the stench of gunpowder and blood, and he could make out collections of broken parts scattered in the black. Whatever had happened up here, it had been bad. "I'm sorry, Pan," said Herc. "I couldn't..." Pan snapped around, jabbing a finger at him. "Did you know?" she said, baring her teeth like a feral animal. "Did you know?" "No," said Herc, shaking his head, making sure to look her right in the eye. "I didn't know, Pan. Ostheim showed up here and I thought he was here to help us. But he just... Christ, he just killed them all. Us, them, he didn't care. He just mowed right through them. Mowed right through us on his way to the elevator. I'm sorry, Pan. I'm so sorry." Pan swallowed, then scrubbed the back of a hand over her face. "Holy guacamole," said Truck, lumbering from the shadows. He scooped Pan up in a bear hug, putting her down again, only when she started slapping him on the shoulders in protest. "Man, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. What happened?" "Ostheim," spat Pan. "That arsehole. I just can't..." "Hey, kiddo, don't go there," said Herc. "None of us saw it coming." "But why?" she said, toe to toe with the big guy. "Why did nobody question it? Why didn't you question it, Herc? You were supposed to be watching out for us. They died, all of them. And for what?" Herc turned away, blinking. For all the gristle and all the scars, he looked about 12 years old in the half-light. "Hey," said Truck. He rested a hand on her shoulder and she shook it away. He tried again, more forcibly this time. "Hey, Pan, we can talk about this later. Right now, we've got to go." He was right. The room was trembling, like the beginning of an earthquake. Marlowe could barely feel it, but it was there, tickling the soles of his feet. "He's right," said a voice. Another person emerging from the dark. A girl dressed in black, a shock of red hair. Ostine will already be opening the gates. "You!" Pan said, jabbing a finger. The redhead stood firm. "I what?" "You better watch the next thing that comes out of your mouth. You brought him here. You did this," the girl said. Pan's face crumpled, her shoulders sagging under 100 tons of truth. She didn't reply. How could she? The redhead was right. Pan had done this, and Marlowe and Herc and Truck. They might as well have opened the gates to hell themselves. "Where is Maman?" the redhead said. Nobody answered, and she put her hands to her face, groaning into them. "No, no, no." "Come on," Herc said gently. "I don't know how long we've got, but it isn't long." "I took out some of it," said Charlie. "I burned some of that bastard machine into dust." "Yeah?" said Herc. Charlie nodded. "Not much, though. There was no time." "It might slow him down," said Herc, dropping onto his knees and rummaging in his duffel bag. "I've got something else here that will help as well." "Where's Torp?" Pan said, staring into the dark with an expression that Marlowe instantly hated, like she was longing for him. He'd almost managed to forget about the French guy. He was probably abseiling down the elevator shaft, about to single-handedly wrestle Ostine into submission before carrying Pan off in those big arms of his. Herc sighed, shaking his head. "Caught a stray bullet," he said, tapping his temple. "Right here. Never even knew about it." "Oh." Marlowe swallowed the guilt back down his throat. Pan's face was made of stone again, her jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. "He would have been happy to know he died fighting," Herc said, "if it makes you feel any better." Not really, Marlowe thought. Not at all. He died fighting for the wrong side. Herc went back to whatever he had in his bag, a series of clicks and beeps from it echoing around the hall. "What is that?" Charlie asked. Herc glanced at him, then performed a perfect double-take when he noticed Charlie wasn't wearing anything. "Don't ask," said Marlowe. "Fair enough," said Herc. "This, my friends, is a Mark 54 Special Atomic Demolition Munition." "A what?" said said Marlowe. "It's a nuke," Charlie replied. "Right?" "A tactical nuclear weapon," Herc confirmed. 6 kilotons of pure trouble for Ostine." "It'll take out the engine," Marlowe said. "It won't even dent it," said Herc, his knees popping as he groaned to his feet. "But it might bury that arsehole for a while. Come on, we've got 20 minutes. He jogged back to the elevator, squeezing through the doors. Nobody followed him, a cloud of exhaustion that hung over them, so heavy that it was almost a physical thing. Marlowe wasn't sure he could even move, even if he wanted to. Herc looked out at them. "I should add that this particular nuke was built in the 1960s, he said. "I can't vouch for its reliability." That did the trick. Everyone scuttling away from the clicking bag like there was a demon inside it ready to clamber out. Pan went in first, Marlowe and Charlie almost wedging themselves as they fought to get through the gap. The redhead was next, standing in a corner and looking nervously at Pan. "Room for a little one?" said Truck, barely able to haul his capacious frame inside. Herc thumped the button, the elevator wobbling up a few feet, then falling still. "Don't you dare," said Pan, so much violence in her voice that the elevator shuddered into life again, reeling them back to the surface. Nobody spoke, everyone thinking the same thing. "Keep moving, please don't stop." Marlowe could picture it. The day overhead, the craving he felt for sunlight was overwhelming, an addict's need. The elevator ground to a halt again, and Marlowe almost ripped the gates off completely as he clattered out into the corridor. Even here the ground didn't feel particularly solid, the engine a gaping maw directly below him. He flinched when he saw the girl up ahead. Claire was hunkered down, blinking at them through big, frightened eyes. She almost smiled, then leaned over and retched. A string of black bile hung from her lips. "I told you we'd come back," Marlowe said, doing his best to find a smile. She got to her feet and wiped her mouth, her weak grin the next best thing to daylight. "It is over," she said, rubbing her stomach. "Not even close," said Herc as he walked past them. "They led Ostheim right here," said the redhead. "Did you see him?" Claire looked at the floor, her eyelids blinking hard as if trying to scrub the sight of him from her corneas. "He walked right past me, Jamie," he said. She shivered, wiping away a tear. "I don't think he even saw me." "He's in the engine," said the redhead, Jamie. "He's won. Mamon's dead." "He hasn't won," said Marlowe. "Not yet." "How'd you figure that?" Herc said. "I'll tell you on the way." They reached the red door, still hanging open. Beyond was the cathedral of candlelit rock, those fires roaring. They walked out together, Herc pulling the door shut behind them. The sound it made when it locked could have been a depth charge going off beneath the ocean. He didn't waste a second, bolting between the columns and shouting over his shoulder. "Hey, Red, you know the path out. I don't feel like crawling through the liminal again." "Left," she said, and they jogged together. Marlowe was running on fumes, but the sickening waves of bad energy pouring out of the engine were a powerful tailwind, propelling him around the corner after corner, through seemingly endless corridors forged from bone. It took him a while to notice that the ground was sloping upwards, slightly at first, then steeper. "This one," said Jamie. She'd stopped next to an alcove in the wall, barely big enough to let one person through. They'd passed hundreds of them on the way. "You sure?" asked Herc. "With Ostheim behind us, not to mention an atomic bomb, I'd better be," she replied, disappearing. Herc grumbled something and followed her, and Marlowe was next, almost tripping on the stairs. It was another spiral staircase, decorated with the dead. "We came down this way," said Marlowe. "No, you didn't," Jamie replied from up ahead, her voice echoing off the walls. "This place is a warren. Only a couple of paths actually lead to the engine. The rest are traps. Get stuck in one, and you'll be there forever. Unless you punch through the wall," said Truck. They climbed in silence, their breaths ragged and desperate. Marlowe lost count of how many stairs there were after 200, but there had to have been as many again. At one point he swore he could hear Truck sobbing. Then they were out, squeezing from a narrow doorway into a tunnel. They were still underground, but Marlowe could feel the change in pressure, no longer a mile of rock overhead. The cry of the engine was still in his veins, but it was quieter now. There was a sign on the wall that said something in French, a picture of an electric bolt. Pipes ran the length of the corridor, beautiful, human pipes that carried electricity or water or gas to a world he'd been sure was lost to him. And he was smiling before he remembered that the world wouldn't be there for much longer, not once Ostheim had opened the gates. Marlowe wasn't sure how any of them made it up the last few flights of steps, but they did. Jamie reached a huge cast-iron door and tugged on it until it squealed open. A torrent of sunlight poured through, a river of it, wrapping Marlowe in fingers of gold and pulling him out into the day. He dropped to his knees, pushing his face into the glorious heat, and crying again. "Hey, Marlowe," Pan said, grabbing his t-shirt, helping him up. "Nuke, about to explode." They were on a street next to the river, Paris laid out before them in shades of white and gold. Smoke rose from 5 or 6 places, the sound of sirens filling the air like birdsong as the engine continued to pollute the air. "Now what?" said Pan. "Now we find transport," said Herc. "Something big." "On it," said Truck, wobbling up the street. "Herc," said Charlie. He stood naked as the day he was born, shivering despite the heat. "Won't a nuke, destroy the whole city?" "No," said Herc. "Too small, too deep. We probably won't even feel it up here." He checked his watch again. 10 seconds. They counted down together, silently. "That was almost disappointing," said Marlowe. "Did it go off?" "It better have," Herc grumbled. "Paid a goddamn fortune for it. Should be." The entire street bucked beneath Marlowe's feet, almost knocking him over. In front of them, the river surged up the side of the banks, foaming in a frenzy as it crashed back down. The city beyond it looked as if it had just hiccuped, everything bouncing once. Half a dozen buildings crumpled into themselves, sagging like they were made of cardboard. A cloud of dust rose, filtering the sunlight and turning the whole area red. Herc, though, had paled considerably. "Whoops," he said. That wasn't supposed to happen. Oh, at least that arsehole Ostein will be picking rocks from his hair for a while, said Jamie. Marlowe heard the sound of an engine, the crunch of gears. He looked back to see an ice cream truck making its way towards them. The street was a patchwork of shattered asphalt, a busted fire hydrant spraying rainbows. Truck leaned out of the window and flicked on the siren, a blast of "Pop goes the weasel," filling the air over the sound of 1,000 alarms. He already had a cone in his fist and he was grinning. "Seriously?" said Herc. "Best I could find," he yelled through a mouthful of ice cream. "It'll do," said Herc. "Everyone on board. Marlowe, I need to know everything that my mom told you." Marlowe nodded, opening the side door and hopping up the steps into the back of the van. He sat on a box of cones and Pan squeezed in next to him, neither of them saying anything, but both of them thinking the same thing. There was still hope. "We're Hellraisers," Herc said from the broken street. "It ain't over yet." The old guy watched as they all clambered in. Charlie was last, and Herc's face creased in disgust as he watched him climb the steps. "First thing first, though," Herc said, hauling himself up and slamming the door shut behind him. "We find Charlie some goddamn pants." And I'm sure they will. So we're on part 3.
Annihilation.
And the next chapter is called Contracts. I can't remember what that one is about. The first line is "After so long stuck in the festering anus of hell." So that's pretty cool. Okay, so we've got about 90 pages left to read. So we should finish this book at some point in the next week or so. I hope you enjoyed that. Twists and turns. I have to say, I didn't even know Marlowe and Pan were fighting to the wrong side until I got to that point in the book, and then I was like, oh my god. And originally, when that nuke went off, I had the Eiffel Tower collapse. But my editor, Wes, who's awesome, said that's probably a bit much. And he was right. I quite like there was just like a hiccup and a few buildings fell over. Okay, I hope that you're well, and I hope you have a lovely day. And yeah, I'll see you very soon. Bye!